Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you here and everyone joining us online and in the chapel service. So we're in this series leading up to Easter, and I thought it'd be fun to start off with a story. Goes way back when I took my daughter hiking, and of course, hiking in my family, we rarely ever went on trails, and we had the headlamps, and we were hiking over this mountain, and it was getting late, and it was dark, and we were in this tall grass, that tall yellow grass, and so you couldn't see what was down by your feet, and there were all of these big rocks, and we kept stubbing our toes, and finally my daughter, and she was real young at the time, she stubbed her toe on this one rock really hard, and she got so mad. She's like, "That stupid rock," and she started kicking that rock some more. I'm like, "Don't kick the rock. That just it's a stupid rock," and she starts kicking it, and at the moment I'm kind of like, well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with kicking the rock. I guess, you're not going to hurt the rock's feelings right now, and I can understand why you're upset with the rock. But then, she kept kicking it till she hurt her other foot. And I was just why are you doing this? But she just got pulled into this thing. And it was just kind of one of those humorous moments, and you may be going, "There's nothing humorous about that." I found it humorous at the moment. But it makes me think of kind of what I want to cover this morning is, sometimes something will happen and we get hurt with something, but it can be really easy to get pulled into this kind of direction that can actually keep causing pain in our life. And I just remember watching my daughter on this, hiking trip, and just she was hurt and frustrated, but she kept getting pulled into this thing that wasn't making it better. It only made it worse. And we can get pulled into something similar in the same way. And I want to address this through something that Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, and it's known as the Lord's Prayer. And we're probably, most of you have probably heard the Lord's Prayer or familiar with it. And we're in this series that is dealing with Jesus in a, what made him different, right? And as we're leading up to Easter, thinking about where do we see Jesus modeling or doing something different? And there's something in particular he does with the Lord's Prayer that I want us to understand, because it addresses this thing, as you'll see, where we kind of get pulled into this thing that maybe we can make things worse rather than better. So the Lord's Prayer, before we go and read it, most times we think of the Lord's Prayer as Jesus is introducing this brand new notion or idea about the Lord's Prayer, that Jesus was the one that invented the Lord's Prayer. But actually he didn't. It was actually a well-known prayer. It was called the Amidah prayer. And it was a prayer that was prayed on a fairly regular basis. And so you've got to picture Jesus in this moment. In Luke, it talks about, they ask him, how should we then pray? And in Matthew, where we're going to look at it in the Sermon on the Mount, he does something similar, and he's like, this is how you should pray. But it comes out of this thing where they're wondering about prayer. So part of it is he's saying, you already know how to pray, okay? You already know how to pray, because most of the people listening to Jesus, all of his disciples, had probably already prayed some form of that Amidah prayer before they even heard Jesus say, and this is how you should pray in this. I want to give you an example of this. Here is an example that archaeologists found inscribed that would have predated Christ. And this is an example of the Amidah prayer. Let me read this and just see if this doesn't sound familiar to you. Here it is. Our Father, the one who dwells in heaven, may your name be holy. May your kingdom come as we do your will here on earth as it is done in heaven. Give us today the bread of today, and deliver us from the evil one. Cursed be he. And so if I wouldn't have told you that was the Amidah prayer, you might go, well, that's an interesting translation or version of the Lord's Prayer, because it's so close. Now, here's the thing that I want you to know, though. This is where Jesus does something different, because there's one thing Jesus does with the Amidah prayer that is very, very different. And anytime a rabbi or anytime you see Jesus do something that changes something up, or he does the unexpected thing, pay attention to that, because that is a way of emphasizing something that's really important here. So there is actually something that Jesus adds to the Amidah prayer that we read in both accounts in the Gospels. And it's important to know this, because all of his disciples, the second he goes into the Amidah prayer, they'd be like, okay, we know this. And then he's gonna add this one thing. They would have all went like, whoa, okay, that's important. That means something. Jesus is emphasizing this for a reason, and we want to understand this. So now let me read you the Lord's Prayer out of Matthew chapter 6. And as I read through it, see if you can recall what he adds, like what's different about this than what I just read from that old version of the Amidah prayer. So here it is, Matthew chapter 6, verse 9. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So what got added there? The part about what? Forgiveness. Yeah. Here's what's interesting. We don't have a single example of the Amidah prayer before Christ that has anything about forgive us of our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors, okay? Then if you look at the Amidah prayer for centuries following Jesus, at best, you will come up with a very, very limited number of examples that have the idea, and forgive us of our debts. But what you do not see before Jesus or after Jesus is this idea, as we also have forgiven our debtors. So Jesus, he uses this prayer that they would have been very familiar with, but then he says, I'm gonna add this part right here. And why that's important is because that is a way of him emphasizing, I want you to know, this is where my way is different. Like when you think about religion in the world, and the Amidah prayer was a daily prayer, and it was a prayer about asking for blessing on your life. You prayed this prayer on a daily basis, saying, God, bless me in my life. And in a prayer about asking for God's blessing, Jesus says, I want you to pray about God's forgiveness for you, but not just God's forgiveness for you, how you will be someone that will be a forgiving person to others, that this is Jesus's way. And in the Sermon on the Mount, which is all about love, right? What does love look like? When he gets to prayer, it's like, I want you to be a part of my way of forgiveness. This would have been very striking because in Jesus's day, the religious culture, especially in the first century and prior, they would have thought of forgiveness, that is between any one person and God. Like, I will pray for God's forgiveness of me. I'll go through the rituals, do all the things to get that. But the idea that I have something to do with that person's forgiveness, no, that's their job. That's their work. They go and do that. And if there's something between us in this, then we deal with that. But my job is not about forgiving somebody else in this. And what Jesus is saying is, no, as God is one who forgives, you're my followers. And I want you to bring that sense of forgiveness. I want this to be your way in this world. And that is a very striking thing. There's a part of that that is so beautiful, isn't there? But there's also a part of that, when we think about that, that can be really, really difficult in this. Ever have someone hurt you in some way, or you felt wounded by someone, and then you tried to take a step towards resolving it, and it just, like, it went sideways, or it didn't work, or you got hurt worse, or it like this frustration? Yeah, like we've all experienced that sort of thing. And here's Jesus saying, and I want you to pray about like forgiving one another. Forgive those just as God has forgiven you in this. And I think this forgiveness thing can be really difficult because at a practical level, it gets messy in this. I recall a time when I was first on staff here. I wasn't the senior pastor. I was starting a service for a younger generation. And I had a number of teammates I was kind of working with, and we had a whole bunch of volunteer leaders that really took this on. And I remember at one point, we were kind of making some changes to the style of music and the approach to music, and which is always, especially back then, a big deal in any church. You mess with the music and it becomes a thing. And I remember saying, so as we're going through this, I for this service designed for younger people, I want us to actually key in on some of these younger leaders and actually pull them to help set kind of the direction we're going to take with this. And one of the guys that I was working with disagreed with me on that, which was fine. And we kind of talked through all of that, and it was just like, there's a lot that we know and understand, but if this is about the next generation, we need to pull them in on this. And I came out of that meeting with him and felt like we were in lockstep. Ever have a meeting or a conversation with someone and you're just like, man, we are in lockstep. We are in agreement. We're on the same page. And then you went out from that meeting or that discussion and you realized we were not in lockstep at all. We weren't in agreement, right? Because maybe you found out about it because you were told not by them, but by somebody else what they were saying about you in that sort of thing, right? And so I experienced that not long after that meeting, and I thought we were all unified and moving in the same direction. And then I had a number of different people that talked with me about how this other person, we weren't in lockstep and where we were going with the music and what it was supposed to be. But here was the part that, and maybe you've experienced this, it wasn't just a disagreement about what we were going to do in terms of who was going to get to be the influencers for who was going to have the, what style of music or what it would be. It became, I didn't care about a group of people, and that I was going to start micromanaging some things. And all of a sudden, it was these judgments about me and this, and it felt at some level okay, this is a betrayal in this thing. And my initial reaction to that was I'm gonna go and talk to him. And as soon as I say, hey, here's what I heard and this is what happened, it's going to be oh man, I'm so sorry I did this or whatever. It'll be, and I'm going to forgive him and it's going to be wonderful and we're going to be back. We're going to get lockstep and we're going to be off to the races, right? So I had this conversation with him about this, and he's like, no, I never said any of that stuff. No, that's I was just it just killed it. And I was just all right. And then it kept coming up in this thing. And I really, as a young leader, I just kind of felt lost in this thing. It's okay, I want to be a forgiving person, but what does that look like? And I, he needs to understand that maybe he said some things that weren't appropriate. And then I really got some concrete information that he indeed actually had said some of these things. So now I'm okay, now I'm going to have this next conversation. And I know. And again, I'm expecting this thing to go down the path of okay, I'm sorry. And here was the misunderstanding, right? And instead, at this point, it wasn't that he denied it, he owned it, but owned the whole narrative and everything. And it was oh my gosh, how did we get so sideways in this thing? But I remember going through that, and my expectation was, right, okay, if I'm gonna live in forgiveness with this person, they need to ask for that forgiveness, or they at least need to say, I'm sorry, or you're right, or I see that now, right? I'm expecting, I need you, because in that moment, you can't just go, well, I forgive you. And they're forgive you for what? I'm offended that you would say, and it's just and I didn't know where to go. I felt stuck in this thing. It's okay, do I just drop it? Does forgiveness look like I'm gonna just let it go and it just is whatever? Or is forgiveness like, okay, I'm gonna force this issue more? Ever feel stuck in a moment of forgiveness where you've been hurt or offended in some way, but it's like the normal path that you would think of like, I'm gonna work this out, all of a sudden it doesn't work, right? Because either they have this really strong disagreement with you, or you realize you can't resolve the issue, right? He and I, they're like this, I just started realizing we weren't gonna resolve that issue. Or maybe it's someone, and there was something that happened, and now you try to engage them, and they won't even talk to you. They won't answer a text or an email or a phone call, right? They won't get into it, and you're just like, I don't know how to even talk to this person about this. Or maybe for some of you, maybe it was a parent, and there was some deep hurt or disagreement that you had, and then they passed away. I mean, they're gone, and you can't go back and actually have a conversation with them where you'd be like, so how do we reach this place of forgiveness? What do you do when you get stuck and you feel like, I'm so mad at that stupid rock, right? And everything in you wants to just kick the rock, but you're like, but I don't think that's the answer either in this thing. You know, one of the things that I did not understand back then, I'll say this, one of the things I did not understand back then is that forgiveness is more about the person doing the forgiving than the one being forgiven. There was a part of me that kept trying to figure out, how does he need to change, or what does he need to realize, or what does he need to do so that we can move forward? I kept thinking about forgiveness was dependent on something with him. And when Jesus says, just as God has forgiven you, you should forgive those that are in debt to you. Notice the way he frames out that prayer, there's no part of it where we're, in the end, where we're actually dependent on that other person to do something in there. And I think this is a place where we oftentimes get stuck. It can be really easy to get stuck here. And so my question is, what do we do? How do we walk this out? If there's this prayer, and notice the prayer is a blessing for us, there's something that Jesus, I think, is getting at in that when we learn to forgive other people, regardless of what they do or don't do, there is a kind of blessing for us. It's not just about setting them free or trying to bless them through our forgiveness, which oftentimes does and is a good and beautiful thing. But I want you to think about this maybe a little bit this morning for what it does for you. And that there's a way of forgiving that you can walk out regardless of what that other person does. And I want to walk this out in 4 parts. I read a book by Desmond Tutu years and years ago, phenomenal book on forgiveness, and he goes in areas I can't even get into this morning, but I want to take his basic outline. I'm going to give you 4 things, and they're not mine. They're Desmond Tutu's. I'm going to reword them, okay? But they're still his. And here are the 4 things on how to walk out forgiveness. When Jesus says, I want you to pray and live this out. And it's simply this. You've got to face it, feel it, release it, and reframe it, okay? Let me say those again. You've got to face it, feel it, release it, and reframe it. And I want to just use that as a kind of framework that you and I can use in a moment where you just feel stuck in trying to walk out forgiveness. So here's the first one. You've got to face it. And what I mean by face it is that you've actually got to acknowledge that there was some hurt. You've got to actually acknowledge that you feel trapped, like that there's something between you and this other person, and you're not sure how to actually move forward in it. I remember when all of that was going down, and I had multiple meetings with this person, and I walked out of every meeting going, well, that didn't go the way I thought it was gonna go. And I was just like, I don't know what to do next, right, in this whole thing. And the senior pastor at that time, Roger, had kind of found out what was going on because someone had shared something with him, and he came up to me, and he was very kind. He just said, I'm so sorry that those things were said about you in that way. And my instinctual reactions, I was like, oh, no, that's okay, it was nothing, right? And part of me was like, because to be a forgiving person means I'm not gonna let it get to me. To be a forgiving person is I'm just like gonna pretend that it's not there, because if it's still there, then that means somehow I've not forgiven him, and I wanna be a forgiving person. But the reality was I wasn't acknowledging it. And if you don't acknowledge it, you can't walk it out. You can't actually move forward in it. And so it starts with acknowledging it and facing it, right? Until you can forgive the person who hurt you, they will be your jailer. Because here's what happens. When we push it off and won't acknowledge it, the effects of it are still all going on. Because you know what was happening with me? I was still frustrated with it deep down. I was still trying to figure it out. It still played into every meeting. I was still in meetings with this person and doing services and stuff. And now I'm trying to navigate that whole thing. I was a prisoner to this whole thing that was going on. And until you actually walk through forgiving someone, you know who is going to be under more stress, more consternation, is going to burn more mental energy over that issue. It's going to be the person who has the opportunity to do the forgiving rather than the person being forgiven. Because the person that was hurt or wounded, like, you're the one that's dealing with all of this stuff. Like, you need this. And until we acknowledge it, like, it all gets stuck. And the truth is, it's like you've handed that other person the keys to your bondage in all of this. I remember it kind of came to a head as we actually there was a retreat. We traveled on this retreat. And again, I just thought, like, oh, we're going to work this all out. And in the end, the good thing that it did was it actually brought it to a head in there. But it finally came to the place where I had to say, I'm wounded in this. I'm hurt in this. And I don't know how to forgive this person. But I know that there's something there. So you have to face it. Second thing is, you have to feel it. And this may seem very close to the first one. You're like, well, isn't like facing it like you got to feel it or whatever? But here's what I would say is that it's one thing to acknowledge that someone did something that hurt or bothered or offended you, that there's pain there. But then oftentimes what we want to do is go, okay, that happened and there's pain there. Now, how do I get around the pain? How do I move forward with the least amount of pain in this whole thing? And here's what I would say. Forgiveness requires that you move through the pain, not around it. That to not pay attention to the deeper effects or the pain, it's going to cause problems that will keep bringing you back to a place of like going through it over and over and over again. The illustration I'm going to use here with this one, how many of you have ever seen like one of the old Harry Potter movies, right? Okay, a few of you, right? And some of you, they're like, I'm not going to admit to that, but you know, whatever, right? I love the tents. Here, I'm going to use the tents from Harry Potter. Remember the tents in Harry Potter? It might seem like a normal tent, right? You'd have like a little tent that was like, 5 feet by 5 feet and with like one little door. And it's straightforward, it's simple, you can get your arms around it, it's logical. And in some ways, that's what like our logical conscious brain is like. And we love it that way. We love it where it's straightforward, where everything adds up, we can figure it out. But what happens when you open up the tent flaps and you look into a tent, like in the Harry Potter world, right? You look in there and it's like this vast, crazy world of all this stuff in there, and you stick your head out and you're like, it's just this little tent. And you look in there and it's like a circus tent in there, and there's stuff going on and there's people and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like, and here's what I'm gonna say. You are like a Harry Potter tent as a human being, right? Okay, and you're just like, did he just, yes, I did. We're complicated. There's a part of us, right, that loves things straightforward and simple. We love for it to add up and make sense. But there's also a part of you and I, right, the way God made us, that is vastly complicated, that is vast and unconscious and like a place where our emotions live and we process things in deep, deep ways. And that is a beautiful part of who we are as human beings, the way God made us. It gives us the capacity to find meaning in life, to love God in rich, rich ways. But it's also vastly complicated. It's right. And so there's a part of us that when we run into a problem, like I remember just being in that conflict with him. I wanted everything to add up. What did I say that he didn't understand and I wanted like to trace the whole thing down. And the reality is I didn't want to bring my emotions into it. Like I wanted to keep it logical and we'll work this all out. But the reality is there were things going on down inside of me. Like if you open up the tent flaps, that whole huge world in there that were going on, and everything in me wanted to just keep the tent flaps closed. But here's the thing. If you ignore that more complex side of your soul, of your emotions, of your heart, you do that at your own peril. And we can get good as human beings as locking that all down. And we think we can keep a lid on all of that stuff. But here's the truth. Pain felt but ignored will always find a way to express itself, friends. If there is genuine pain, and it doesn't matter who was right or wrong, if you've experienced pain and you ignore it, I promise you it will find a way to express itself. It will come out. Doctors have known this for years and years and years, right? When we don't deal with that stuff, it will come out in physical ways. It will affect your blood pressure. It will affect the health of your heart. It can lead to strokes. It can attack your immune system. The list goes on and on and on and on. Counselors and researchers have known this for years, right? If you have pain, and you ignore it, and you just try and say, okay, I'm gonna be really rational about this. And here's what I did. The things that I heard him say about me aren't true. Therefore, I should just blow them off. They don't hurt if they're not true, right? That was my rational brain. But you open up the tent flaps, and there was some part of me in there is going, nope, I don't care if it's true or not. That hurt for some reason. We're gonna make up a story about this. This is like it. Things start happening in there, and I'm like, no, we're not gonna let that out. But here's the deal: it won't stay there, right? Counselors know this. They see this with depression and anxiety. They see this in a multitude of ways. It will steal joy from your life. It will ratchet things down in your heart. It will have a negative effect on you. And it doesn't matter how much we pretend that it is or isn't there in all of this. You know, the other thing that it does, and this is important for our ability to forgive, as human beings, we understand what's most meaningful in life through story. And this isn't to say that we create false stories at all. It's that we look at the facts of our life, and for them to make sense or to be meaningful, we see it in a story. If you're hurting, your heart and your brain is going to make a story that will answer the question of why. Why are you hurting? If there's something beautiful or wonderful happening, you will have a story that helps you understand and explain that beautiful thing that is going on. And here's what happens. When we lock up that tent and we ignore what we're feeling in there, stories will start to form in there. But here's where those stories go, inevitably. And as I describe this, you're probably gonna go, oh, that's so true. Here's what happens with these stories. If I lock that away, I will start creating a story about my pain that will turn the person that I think is responsible for it into like a total villain. I will make them all bad, right? I will come for them to do that, and all of a sudden I will start writing a story that makes me think of that other person with the worst possible motives, that is bad in every way. Like I'll turn them into a total villain. And you know what I'll do with myself? I'll become the perfect little victim. I'll be the victim in all things. right? And because that helps make sense of it. And if I lock that away in there, it's gonna start creating those stories without me actually processing it in a more logical way that mixes in with all of that. And that story will start to have me viewing that person in a certain way, viewing myself in a certain way. I'll start reacting. It's like kicking a rock because it hurts your foot is what you start doing. And it will cause pain and trouble. And so when I say you've got to feel it, all you're doing when you feel it is you're saying, I'm gonna be honest about all of me. I'm gonna be honest that there's a logical, I can look at this and say logically, well, I know that's not true. And so logically, it seems like it shouldn't be a big deal to me. But there's this other part of me that's saying, no, this is a big deal to you. I need to be honest about the truth of the complexity of all that is. And so do you. I think this is why maybe Jesus put this in a prayer that was like a daily kind of prayer. And God, as you forgive me of my debts, may I also forgive all of those who are in debt to me. Like there's this ongoing thing that I need to feel my feelings in that moment. My daughter, she's far less of a feeler than me. And I remember as she got like early into high school and there was like all of the drama, like just teenage drama and everything. And she wasn't as fast at like identifying her feelings. And so I'd always say, what's your feelings? You gotta feel your feelings. And I would frustrate her so bad with those lines. And I remember one particular time, I think she was a freshman in high school and we were driving in the truck and it was just the two of us and she was telling me about what happened. And and I said, well, like, what do you feel? And she's like, I don't know what I'm feeling. You frustrate me so much when you ask that. I'm like, there you go, write that down. Frustration is a feeling right there, right? And all of a sudden she looked at me and she's like, yeah, I am frustrated with you, just like I am with one of my friends. I'm like, and there was something about naming it in that moment that helped. So here's what I would say is, learn to name what you're feeling. And it doesn't mean that you agree with it being right. You may analyze it and go, you know what, I'm overreacting. There's a part of my feeling, but it's real, it's honest to you. Figure out a way to name those feelings. Now, I think you'll experience this as well. As you allow yourself to feel your feelings, you are dissipating like the emotional charge in them. Over time, they'll start to dissipate because what you're doing is you're giving yourself room to actually process what's going on. And you're gonna need that for this next step. The reason these first two steps are so important is because if you never acknowledge it and you never feel it, you won't be able to release it. You won't be able to honestly forgive someone of something you're not even being honest with yourself about what it's done to you. So the first two steps are all about just kind of being honest with yourself so that you can honestly have a moment where you can forgive them. And the next step of that forgiveness process is to release it. Now, as I talk about release it, I want to go back to something Jesus said, because immediately following the Lord's Prayer, so he goes through the Lord's Prayer, and then he gives some commentary on what he just said in the Lord's Prayer. And what's interesting is all the commentary is about one line in the Lord's Prayer, the part about forgiveness. That's another reason why we know Jesus is emphasizing this thing about forgiveness. I want you to actually step into a way of being where you can forgive those that have wronged you, that have sinned against you or have hurt you in some way. But now, at first glance, it's really easy to read what Jesus says in this commentary and go, that was just bizarre. Because if you read it at face value from kind of a modern Western understanding, we see it as this kind of weird description of God that makes God like vengeful and petty or like just strange. And here's what I want to say is, That's not what Jesus is trying to do, okay? Jesus is actually trying to do something very different. He's actually using a type of what would be called rabbinic hyperbole. And rabbinic hyperbole was not meant to tell us what God is like. It doesn't do that. Rabbinic hyperbole doesn't even tell us what we're supposed to do. Like, it's not about saying this is how you're supposed to behave. There's a different purpose to rabbinic hyperbole, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. But first, I want to read the verse to you, and then we'll look at what Jesus is doing, because it's pretty cool what he does with this. So look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 14. He says this, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins," right? So we read that, and if we just say Jesus is trying to tell us what God is like, it's like, wow, really? Like if I'm kind of petty and I won't forgive someone, that means God's gonna be petty as well and go, well, then I'm not gonna forgive you, right? It's like, no, I don't think he's trying to describe God there. This is, right? This is not a thing of like somehow your eternal destiny is at stake, because if you somehow don't forgive someone else, God's gonna go, there was that person that wronged you and you didn't forgive them, so I'm just tough out of luck, dude. Sorry, right? That's not what's happening here. Let me give you a few other quick places of rabbinic hyperbole that Jesus uses. So one place Jesus says, gouge out your eye, right? Another place he says, cut off your arm. Another place Jesus says, you need to hate your father and hate your mother. And we're like, that doesn't sound like Jesus. He seemed like he really liked his mom. Right? He did, right? This is rabbinic hyperbole. He's not saying, go gouge out your eye, or that like, unless you hate your mom, I'm just not gonna feel like you really love me. That's not what Jesus is doing, okay? Here's what rabbinic hyperbole is meant to do. It's meant to be kind of diagnostic, or like a mirror. It's meant to be jarring so that I can go, oh my gosh, I see something about me that I couldn't see before. And now that I see this, now that's freed me to actually live in a different way. Now I can see something in me that I maybe didn't want to see, but now that I see it, it's gonna help me actually follow God in some way or understand what Jesus is getting at. So when he says this thing, he's pointing out this duality. He's saying, right, again, hyperbole, right? If there's someone that you won't forgive, don't think that God's gonna forgive you. And it's this duality of like, do you think that I can live in forgiveness over here? Like, I belong to a special class of people that God likes enough that when I do something wrong, I get to be forgiven. But there's people over here, see, they're different. In fact, if they do something, I don't need to forgive them, right? And Jesus is just saying, do you see the duality? If you live in a place where you won't forgive others, but you're living as if God will forgive you, do you see the duality? That's all Jesus is trying to do here. And here's why I think this is brilliant. Because we can actually create that kind of duality when we get hurt. When someone hurts us and there's an offense, it becomes really easy to write off all the reasons why, as a human being, they're different, and I get to hang on to my hurt. I get to hang on to my sense of retaliation or getting them back, or in ways that we would never want someone to hold us in the same way. In effect, what he's doing is it's like he's regrounding us back into our humanity. And in order to release that offense, I think there's something really helpful that if we can get back to this thing and say, you know what? That person that hurt me, they're a human. They're not all bad, just like they're not all good. And you know who else is not all bad? I'm not all bad, and I'm not all good. Have I ever said anything to somebody else that was maybe out of some of my baggage that wasn't fair or offensive about somebody else who wasn't there? Yeah, I've done that. Kind of like the thing that happened to me. And I think all Jesus is doing in this moment is just saying, can you come back to a place where you can see that in this world where we're gonna hurt each other, we're human. We're not all good. We're not all bad. And probably as much as I'm hurt by something that someone else might do to me, under the right circumstances, I'd be capable of probably doing that same thing. It helps me just go, maybe I can extend a little grace in the same way that I have a Heavenly Father that extends me a lot of grace. So what does it mean then to actually release someone from that offense? Does it mean that there's no consequences? I don't think so. Does it mean that there's now no accountability? I don't think so. I think let's say if someone stole something from you, to forgive them, does that mean that you are not allowed to say, can I have it back, what you stole? I think if someone steals something from you, you can forgive them and still say, and I think you should give that back, right? Here, let me describe what needs to be released by giving you I want to give you 3 tangible things with release that actually gets to the core of what's got to be released. And I'm going to put these in first person so that we can each think of these like, okay, this is what I'm releasing in this. Here's the first one. I will let go of my right to cause pain for the suffering that they caused me. I'll let go of my right to cause them pain back to somehow make up for the pain they caused me. And isn't there something in us that goes, man, that person, they said some things about me. I'm gonna find a way to say some things about them that man, that'll cause. And it's like, no, I'm gonna give up my right to that. I'm gonna release that person of that. Here's the second one. I'm gonna let go of my right to wish for their suffering for what they did for me. Because we can go to the point where we can say, okay, I won't do anything, but boy, I hope it happens, right? I'll be looking for it. I'm watching for it. But what happens when I get into the place where I'm like, okay, I won't cause any pain, but I'm gonna always be looking and watching, and I can't wait for payback, right? Who is in bondage to what in that moment? I'm in bondage to my desire or wishing for you to get what's coming to you, see? And if I want to be free, I've got to release that. Forgiveness sets the forgiver free. This is not easy to do, right? But it's powerful. Third thing. I let go of my right to hold them with disdain or hate. So I can no longer wish for pain on their life. I can say I'm not gonna do that. But what I'm not gonna do also, what I'm also gonna release them from is that I'm not gonna hold them as less than. I'm not gonna hold them with disgust. I'm actually gonna let them just be human. That's a powerful thing, but when you can get to that place, and do you see why if you don't feel all of your feelings, if you don't acknowledge it, you'll never get to the place where you can really release them and really forgive them. And here's the thing, what have they had to do in order for you to do that? Nothing. It can be someone that just really hurt you deeply and they died years ago and you never had a chance to go back and confront them or deal with this. You can still walk through these steps and be released. You can still forgive them in a way that brings life to you in this. I think about Jesus in this moment. Here's what Jesus actually modeled. There was a moment when he was hanging on the cross, being mocked and jeered, and he prayed a prayer. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And Jesus is saying that day at the Sermon on the Mount, would you come and be a part of my way of being? Can you find a way to forgive even if someone else can't? And for me, this became a journey with this individual of just where I felt stuck and then having to kind of go through these steps, maybe not this clearly, but actually going through these steps and just going, I'm never going to resolve the issue. We're never going to agree on things, whatever. But without any of that, I've got to find a way where it's not dominating all the things that I'm thinking of and going through. And the reason I knew I needed to go through all of that was because, and this is a great indicator for you. If you're just like, well, I don't know that I need to go through all that with someone. Maybe I can just kind of let it go. And maybe you can. But I found that even though I kept saying, no, it's no big deal, I don't care, I was having arguments with this person when they weren't there. Like every morning in the shower, I'd get ready to go to the office and I'm having an argument. Angie walked in, who are you talking to? Well, someone who's not here right now. And it's just like, maybe I need to open up the tent flaps and go, there's some stuff going in there and I need to deal with that, right? Because, right, that's an indicator. If it's dominating your thoughts, if you're losing sleep over it, if you find yourself pulling every conversation toward that pain, maybe that's an indicator you need to walk through these steps. But let me end quickly with that last step, because it doesn't just end here. Because oftentimes you can go through these steps and then there's this thing of like, okay, so now does this mean I need to now re-engage this relationship and move it back to exactly where it was before? And my answer to that is no, or maybe. But here, and this is reframe it, when you are able to release it, you're set free. You get to reframe that relationship. Maybe it's to reconcile it into everything it was before, maybe more than before. Maybe you get to just release that relationship and say, I'm gonna keep that relationship at arm's length, because the reality may be, you may say now, I don't hold them in disdain, but there's a pattern in their life, and I'm not going to choose to trust them in the way that I did before. Not because I hold them in disdain, but because it's just, that wouldn't be smart for me. You get to choose to do that. It's interesting, years and years and years after all of that kind of went sideways and I kind of walked through all of that, there was, and we hadn't worked together in years and years, I showed up to do a wedding. And lo and behold, if he wasn't the person that was going to do all the music and singing for that wedding. And it was a really good time. Because in that moment now, instead of it being like all this, it was like, I'd finally reached that point where I could go over and wish goodness on his life and actually enjoyed being able to do that, but not feeling like, and we've got to go partner in ministry and everything we're doing from now on and everything. It's just, because forgiveness has the power, friends, to set the forgiver free. And Jesus is saying, pray for that, because I want that for you in what it will do for you.